Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Torch Bite-Sized Hotspot. For those who are here to hear the talk, do take a seat or come and stand closer. You're very welcome here this evening. Welcome on behalf of Torch, which is the Oxford Research Centre in the Humanities, which is involved with the Ashmolean in putting on tonight's entire evening. And what we do is we feature the research of Oxford scholars and Oxford researchers, and some of them are here tonight to tell us in a bite-sized way about their work. And first up is Professor Cathy Morgan, who is going to tell us about embodying life and fear, in particular in ancient Greece. Cathy Morgan is Professor of Classics and Archaeology here at Oxford, and she was till 2015 the Director of the British School in Athens. An active archaeologist, her research focuses on the history and archaeology of the early Iron Age and archaic Greece, and notably the Corinthian Gulf and the Ionian Islands, and she has a particular interest in Greek religion and ritual, and I suspect she's going to tell us a little bit about that now. So Cathy, I'm going to hand over to you for your bite-sized talk.
Thank you very much. Well, this evening I'm going to whisk you back a little bit earlier, 5,000 years BC, before present in fact, to think about how these very simple marble figures embodied the hopes and fears of Greek islanders. You may have seen the display case of them down in the prehistory gallery, and in fact a lot of my photographs are of Ashmolean pieces. If not, I hope you'll take a look later on. Now, nowadays, it's the simplicity and the clean lines of these figures that catch the imagination. Most are plank-like and geometric. Some are more elaborate. A rare example is this beautiful harp player from a grave on Caris that's now in the National Museum in Athens. But it's this aesthetic that has been a major influence on sculptors worldwide. I show pieces by Barbara Hepworth, and especially Henry Moore, who visited the Cyclades many times and openly acknowledged his debt. As a result, Cycladic figurines have become very popular on the art market, fueling problems of looting to which we will return. They are eye-wateringly expensive things. But this aesthetic approach is entirely modern. To understand what they originally meant, we have to look at their archaeology. And here, fortunately, we have lots of new research. Now, in the later Greek world, we've got ample evidence of how figures were implicated in conversations between men and gods. As part of a prayer, offering the god a token as something pleasing, or to symbolize the interests of the supplicant. To symbolize a specific request for a cure, for example. These are the bad legs from a healing sanctuary in Corinth. You can get spleens and hearts and all that kind of thing as well. To represent deities or worshippers, this is often a bit ambiguous, or as props for ritual performance. In these later times, we've got written evidence to help, but of course, texts don't tell us everything. In the 3rd millennium BC, we have just archaeology. We can play with these kinds of ideas, and we can see a very strong shared conception over a particular geographical area. But ultimately, we've just got the objects and their context. So let's begin with the region, the Cyclades. Tight network of generally very small islands in the central Aegean with a distinctive material culture. Most were settled, with many large communities, which were centers of manufacturing, copper metallurgy, stoneworking, pottery production, agricultural storage, and maritime trade. And this is what the environment looks like. Close juxtaposition of sea, often fertile land, indivisibility between the islands, promoting very strong interdependence between the chain, as well as individual island identity. Now, throughout the 3rd millennium, hundreds, if not thousands, of figures were made in the local marbles found throughout the region. Most stayed in the Cyclades, a few were traded to surrounding areas, Crete, the Ionian coast up to Troy, and Attica, but they're basically local things. In terms of labor and resources, they're significant pieces of work. Marble is actually quite a soft stone, but the copper tools available at this time are even softer. We're not in the Bronze Age yet. So what we think they do was to use probably water-washed marble beach pebbles, which are roughly the right shape, then hammer them down with hammerstones using emery as an abrasive which occurs naturally in the area, finish them using a friction drill, perhaps tipped with obsidian, the volcanic glass, which you find on Milos, and probably using a compass to establish the proportions. So it's significant work. Their shapes, as you see, don't really point to any particular approach to display. None of them stand up unsupported. They could have been wedged upright. Some are actually found propped up in rock niches. The more rounded ones especially may have been suspended. There's one school of thought that suggests that they were laid down, perhaps laid flat on the marble pallets which are commonly found with them. But they are decorated in the round, so at some point they're designed to be seen in 360 degrees or to be manipulated. The figures continue throughout the third millennium. Some development over time, a little geographical variation. We've developed quite an elaborate typology, which I won't bore you with, but overall the fundamental concept remained remarkably consistent. The vast majority are female. We have got some males, we've got some hermaphrodites, but in small numbers. These are adult, fertile women, not pregnant, but indicating fertility with the hands by the stomach, defined breast and genital area, occasionally very marked postpartum stomach lines, and their faces are tilted up. They're full of life. They give a very strong sense of current and potential life. There are almost no children, though. I've put up a very rare case of what we think is a sculptural group of a child that's obviously being held out, but those are really only 2 or 3 pieces of this kind. Most are 30 to 50 centimeters tall, like the middle group, but there is a second, much larger category, 70 to 80 centimeters and up. Types are the same, they're found together. Some graves have got pairs of large and small. So I think we've got to reach for some sense that size intensifies or enhances meaning, and that this is somehow brought out in display. They have painted details in red, blue, and black, which gives us a few more clues. These are now largely invisible to the naked eye. Red pigments penetrate and stain the marble. The azurite blues stay on the surface and protect the figures from weathering, so sometimes you get raised lines where there's been paint. But mostly we're using ultraviolet and raking light photography to bring this out, hence the drawings. Some of the pigments are imported and probably expensive. The red, for example, is not iron as you'd expect, it's cinnabar, which is really quite exotic. Now, the markings broadly break down into anatomical detail, usually in black or blue, picking out the head and body junction, the junction of limbs or torso, the hair, sometimes with a headband or headdress of some kind, but most strikingly, eyes, big, often multiple, and in funny places. So emphasizing sight, foresight, second sight, the evil eye, whatever. Then we've got ritual action on the body, as we see up here. Red streaks, which may be bloody scratches on the face and on the chest. We often encounter scarification in later Greek rituals of mourning or prostration, so drawing blood by tearing at your cheeks, and that's what we see here. Body art, perhaps paint or tattoos, dots on the face and body, and less commonly things like zigzags. These are quite varied, and some may be specific to a place or perhaps an event. Interestingly, where a choice has to be made, the expensive red cinnabar is saved for the blood and the tattoos. The marks, I don't think, work as dress. If these were clothed, they were clothed with textile, and that's gone. But we may have a little bit of jewellery. Now, looking at this painting overall, much is common and consistent over the entire millennium. But there are oddities which may represent more local identities or perhaps relate to specific events. But I emphasize the body art and the mutilations as establishing these figures as personalities somehow within rituals. Many figures had been repainted on several occasions, perhaps for periodic ceremonies or to change their purposes. The marble shapes are just blank canvases to which meaning can be attached, repeated, or altered as needed. Most of these figures are found in graves, and often with very personal collections of grave goods. Sadly, the looting for the illegal market makes it very hard to determine what percentage of the dead actually got them. And to put this into context, we have no information whatsoever for about a quarter of our surviving figures. And at the other end, we can be sure of the island and perhaps the context for about 40%. So this market is really doing damage. What we know suggests that there was no particular link to the age or gender of the deceased, or to the location or size of the cemetery. But the figures are rarely found in more than 1 or 2 graves per cemetery, so perhaps just one family or one clan in the community had access to them. The graves may also contain pallets or bowls for pigments and obsidian blades for cutting, for shaving, for bloodying yourself. So did the painted decoration imitate what was done to elite bodies in real life? The figurines that were offered had had a previous use life. Many have been repainted, they're broken, in some cases they've been repaired. So again, perhaps their biography is telling us part of the story. We do have hints of non-burial uses on a couple of islands, but only recently has a big cult context come to life. And I'm going to end with a look at this excavation on Caris Island near Naxos in the Little Cyclades. Caris is a really tiny island, 15 square kilometers, mostly of mountain, now uninhabited, just a few goats and a few archaeologists to bother them. But it's famously the source of the largest collection of looted fragments yet traced, the so-called Caros hoard, now repatriated to Greece thanks to the efforts of our colleagues in the Museum of Cycladic Art in Athens. New work from 2008 onwards has focused on 2 neighbouring sites which may have been physically connected in prehistory: the settlement on the island of Daskalio and Keros Kavos, long thought to be a secondary dump of burial goods, but in fact now clearly a sanctuary. This is Daskalio, effectively covered by a very large early Cycladic town, which seems to have been a very well-connected trade and manufacturing centre, and the 2 special deposits are immediately opposite, 100 metres apart, in this very theatrical kind of location near the beach. This is the south one being excavated in 2008. And these are unlooted in situ deposits of fragments of figurines, marble vessels, pottery, shell, and obsidian. You literally fall over this stuff. This is my little memory photograph because I slammed my survey rod down on what I thought was a rock. Looked down and thought, oops, it's got legs. That was about £3,000 worth of antiquity I nearly broke. There is substantial overlap with typical grave goods, but no bone, no evidence of jewellery or personal ornament. It's a selection of items, in other words, and in very, very small token fragments. Everything is broken, there are almost no joins. And this is really significant. If you dig a sanctuary, surely everything is usually beaten up, but your conservators can usually make something of it. Here we really can't. It looks as though collections of fragments are brought to the island, perhaps in bags or other containers, emptied out by the shore to form pockets of finds which built up into the big deposits. And these are some of the figurine fragments laid out in Naxos Museum with the site excavator Colin Renfrew. Every visitor had to play spot the join, and sure enough, we just couldn't. There's no evidence that they were sawn up on Caros, so the suggestion is that at the end of their use life, they were cut up on their home island, one piece ritually deposited on Caros, and the rest somehow used locally. Now remember here that many grave finds were broken, and most looked to be at the end of a use life. So, did the figurines themselves need to be killed and the bodies treated with reverence? We can think about how the distribution of the fragments linked the elite, the local community, and the wider island network via the common sanctuary on Caros. Locally, the death of a member of an elite family may have occasioned a particular kind of funerary gathering and the burial of one of their figures. On Caros, it seems that groups may have arrived from time to make offerings at Kavos, and perhaps these occasions were real gatherings too, with Caris Kavos serving as a central Cycladic shrine, a meeting place akin to Delos in historical times. So, we can't answer obvious questions like whether our figures are deities or mortals, but we can make suggestions about how they embodied community concerns, hope, fear, death, speaking to the divine, connecting communities, and probably also linking generations. that created a power which eventually had to die with the ritualized burial and or destruction of the object. Now, fortunately, they may have died, but they're not all still buried. There is a wonderful case of them downstairs. Please take a look, but if you do me a favor, less Henry Moore and more blood and gore when you see them. Thank you.